Hello, everyone. I thought I would give a lecture on chapter 6 to assist you in perhaps understanding some of the concepts, chapter 6 from the Sensor and D'Angelo text. So let's jump right into that lecture, that material. So chapter 6 deals with the idea of privilege. And privilege is, as we have said before, one of those words that is a hot button issue, a trigger word, if you will. A lot of people are very upset about this idea of privilege, whether it be male privilege or white privilege, or in this case, from this chapter, privilege as it relates to able-bodied individuals and the world being designed for individuals that are able-bodied, if we can use that term. And ableism is discrimination against those in the disabled community, those that, whether it be visually impaired, whether it be the deaf community, so discrimination against those individuals. So privilege is one of those words that is often misunderstood within the sociological context. So today we thought we would shed some light on that, these ideas. And so let me do something. I'm going to jump right back on here. The idea of privilege is really important for us to understand in a class like this. And we have said it does not mean one is, in this context, one is privileged financially. And so normally in the common usage of the word privilege, one comes into the world with a trust fund, or they're given a brand new car at 16 years old, or before they even turn 16, they have a brand new vehicle. And when they graduate from high school, they are afforded a six-figure job in their parents' company, and an apartment is purchased for them as soon as they are of age in the Hamptons or in the Cincinnati area, Indian Hill. They always have on $500 shoes or a $3,000 outfit that's purchased by them. That's what we think of privilege. A person paying cash for their parents paying cash for them for their college education. They never have to work. We don't mean privilege in that way. We mean unearned benefits based on one's race, or based on one's gender, like male privilege, or based on a person that is able to see or see well and hear well. So let's move forward further here in the text, in the lesson. I am not privileged. I work for every single thing I have. And that's a common quote we always hear. And many of us have said that, including myself. But here, according to Sensor and D'Angelo, the idea of privilege has nothing to do about how hard we worked. It has nothing to do with how hard you worked. And so let's see how they define privilege in the text. Privilege defined by Sensor and D'Angelo is, quote, the product of structural advantages. So when we mean by structural, that means society is built a certain way to give a certain group of people advantages. Like male privilege is probably one of the easiest to understand. So we haven't had any women to be president of the United States. And most recently we had Hillary Clinton, and we had even more recently Kamala Harris, and they were not successful. And many would have voted for them if they had been male. But many people in the U.S., and we can find this out statistically in the data, did not choose them simply because they were women. So males have a privilege in that way. And we can think of multiple examples. Fortune 500 companies, the number of male CEOs, number of male college presidents, number of male high-level positions in engineering firms and scientists, the scientific community, those kinds of things. Same thing with race. in terms of privilege. A structural advantage, a societal advantage that advantages those of European American background over those of black and brown ethnic or racial background. So the same example we could use there. We've only had one African American president in the history of our country. There has not, for example, the institution where I teach, there's never been an African American president of the university, and you can think of many other examples. The small percentage of black and brown teachers in education across the board, across the U.S. 93% of the educators in Kentucky are white females, and so there's a very small percentage of educators in the state of Kentucky that are black or brown, and so that's a structural advantage that those of European American background have. One automatically receives privilege by simply being a member of a dominant group. It has nothing to do with how hard you work. It's just being a part of that group. So we're critical of the cultural deficit theory. This is something that we're critical of. The explanation that minoritized groups do not achieve in society because they lack the appropriate cultural values or because their culture is deficient in some other way. And so Ruby Payne's work, Cultural Poverty, supports this false idea. But the idea is, for example, black children don't succeed in school because they're lazy and they don't want to learn. That's just not true. Or African Americans do not get good jobs because they don't want to work hard, and they don't want to be a part of corporate America because they're lazy. That's simply a stereotype, and it's racism. What person does not want to do well and make a lot of money? What person does not want to do well in school? And as a teacher, I remember seeing that. Nobody, and I often said this, nobody, who wants to get an F? Because the idea is, look at the Hispanic kids, they don't even try. Look at the black kids, they don't even try. They want to do bad. They want to fail. They want Fs. That's just one example. And that's not true, because I remember some of the toughest kids and some of the ones that were stereotyped, when they did very well on the paper, you could take the most gangster person that society stereotypes as, oh, he doesn't want to learn, she doesn't want to learn. And many times as a high school teacher, middle school teacher, when I saw those individuals do well on the test, they had the biggest smile on their face, and they would tell their mom. Can you imagine that? This big tough guy, who's everybody is afraid of because they misunderstand him. He gets an A on a social studies test and takes it home and shows mom. So the culture of poverty is inaccurate. This cultural deficit theory, I should say, is inaccurate. Okay, and I want to just point out again that we're critical of that idea. External and structural dimensions of privilege. The integration of group-based norms into the structure of society. And so the norms set by European Americans and white middle-class values being superimposed on other groups and other ethnicities make it problematic, because other cultures are deemed deviant or abnormal or wrong, okay? But we need to think about the idea of cultural relativism, being culturally relevant, and saying that other cultures that are different from us can be a correct way of doing it also, like Asian culture. And I had a colleague that just recently went to Finland, and one of the things she talked about is how they do breakfast is completely different from the way we do breakfast. She said every day, and she was staying with some individuals, every day they had porridge and all kinds of meats, different kinds of strange meats that we wouldn't associate with breakfast. Whereas in the United States, and I feel like personally, we have the best breakfast, but that's my personal opinion, of course. Because when I went to England, just as a side note, I really didn't like their breakfast. It was like a boiled egg, and they had cold cuts for breakfast, and olives, and bread that wasn't toasted. And for us, breakfast is, if you eat this way, like a country breakfast, like bacon, eggs, pancakes, waffles. And if you want to eat healthy, it's oatmeal and raisin bran and wheat toast and orange juice. We have different things about breakfast that then in Finnish culture, and then the English culture, I gave that example, it's completely different. Now, the one I did like was breakfast in Spain. Oh my goodness, they got some really good breakfast. But that's a cultural example. But we superimpose our idea of normal on other people, and especially as it has to do with able-bodied community versus disabled. The way which is what this chapter primarily is about, the way we set up our desk in classrooms, the way everything is set up that's not wheelchair accessible, and we assume that everybody in the world can walk and they're not in a wheelchair. And we build, imagine this, we build entire structures and centers and universities and organizations without wheelchair accessibilities, and the federal government has to make us come up to code. Even the way we teach, there are assumptions here about the way I'm teaching now that everybody can do this, but that's not the case. The construction of what is normal and not normal is determined by the dominant group. The invisibility of privilege for the dominant group. So again, there's a pushback from us, and I'm saying us. I refer to my male privilege and my privilege as a heterosexual male, my privilege as a able-bodied person. There are advantages I have, and so if you want to understand this idea of privileges, think of advantages. Okay, even small advantages. I'll use the racial example. I'm a girl dad, which I'm very proud of. You'll hear me say that. I'm a girl dad, and when I go shopping for them for their birthday or for Christmas, my girls like dolls, and sometimes it's very difficult. It's getting better because my sisters, when they were younger, I had a lot of sisters. My mother was only able to buy them dolls of European descent, and you all can see my skin tone. And so my sisters were about my skin tone. And so imagine them growing up with dolls that do not look like them. What message does that send to them? You might say, well, it's no big deal. It doesn't matter whether you're black, purple, pink, or green. I don't always say that because nobody is actually pink or purple or green. We go into this tirade like it doesn't matter. But it does matter. Sometimes that's a position of privilege. If one grew up with dolls that look like them, that's a privilege you have. So in your play, you can never have anybody that looks like you and meets the standard of beauty that is in your community. And so my sisters had to grow up with Barbies and dolls that were of European descent. And then toy makers becoming a little bit more culturally sensitive, and so they started making a small percentage of black and brown dolls. Even today, though, if I go to a store after a certain time in Christmas season, I can't find all of the black and brown dolls are gone. And so many times I'll just choose not to get any because I want African American women, my daughters, to feel good about themselves and be confident in who they are and not try to meet anybody else's standard of beauty. I hope you understand that. The invisibility of privilege for the dominant group. So I talked about that. The dominant group often doesn't see their privilege. This gets into some legislation. The integration of dominant group norms into the structure of society. And so the way society is structured, the dominant group establishes their ideology as normal, even the way the dominant group speaks, like standard English. So if a person from New York is like talking with that New York accent, like character, we consider that abnormal. Or a person from rural Kentucky, I tell you what, brother, and I used to be able to do a rural, because I had I'm not from rural Kentucky, but I had relatives from there, and I could emulate their accent. I'm not going to try to do it now. Bible and all that kind of stuff. But I moved to the city. I grew up in the city primarily, and so I have a standard English accent. But also, the way I grew up, I should say, was African American vernacular, and so we use a lot of African American vernacular, like we drop ings and looking. What you looking at, bruh? And, I code switch. But who's to say that the standard corporate English is correct? Because when you go over to Britain, I have friends in the UK, in Britain, and they say we speak improper English. Our English is proper. They say that in UK, that English is proper and brilliant. And when I'm there in England, I can speak like them, but I can't do it now. And they think that they speak the King's English, and they would say our English is incorrect. And so think about that, how the dominant group can establish what's normal. Now, I started to say this when you get into legislation, the Americans with Disability Act of 1990, this is something unique about the American system, because speaking of the British system, they don't have as sophisticated laws as we do to support those in the disabled community. In fact, there's a lot of abuse. If you look at English law, it's not anywhere close to what abilities we have, what privileges we afford as a society to support those of the disabled community. Now, we can do much more, but for example, the law says that we have to put curb cuts where the sidewalk slopes to the street for people with limited ability to be created. That's by law. Tactile paving, textured structures for people that are visually impaired to be created. Sometimes when you're at the elevator, you might notice the braille, and for those that are visually impaired, closed caption for the hearing impaired when you're watching a television show, and the closed captioning is available for those that are hearing impaired. So those are part of the Americans with Disability Act that came about in 1990. So it's been around for a little while. Okay, the construction of what's normal and not normal by the dominant group. Normal is the line drawn around an arbitrary set of ideas of group determines a group. The line drawn, arbitrary is the important operative word here. So it's not based on anything. It's arbitrary set of ideas of a group. It determines what's acceptable in a given place and time. For example, able-bodied people are considered quote unquote normal. Disabled bodied people are considered abnormal. Why? In schools, if students with disabilities are placed in a classroom with no teacher aid, quote unquote normal students' learning will be slowed down and limited. And so that's a flawed way of thinking about this, okay? The invisibility of privilege for the dominant group. Because those in the dominant group are not disadvantaged by the oppression, but in fact benefit from it. They find it easy to dismiss the experiences of persons from the minoritized group. And so if it doesn't affect me, I benefit from not having wheelchair accessibility. It doesn't matter to me. I'm able-bodied. I benefit from not having closed caption, and it doesn't affect me. But it causes, but our privilege allows us not to think about, what if somebody can't hear Dr. Child's lecture? What if someone can't access the classroom? I've had students in my class that had a wheelchair, and it really caused me to be humble and think about what they had to go through, and it allowed me to see how inadequate our institution was, and we could do a better job in terms of access to the classroom, the way the desks are set up, etc., etc., etc. To see and validate oppression requires questioning a system that benefits us. So we have to really go out of our way and use our privilege, go out of our way to question the system. It does take us out of our comfort zone. Okay. Internal and attitudinal dimensions of privilege. We have a right to that position, and so we have a right, males have a right to professor jobs, and when women begin to try for jobs that were traditionally male jobs, I'm talking about male privilege and patriarchy, there's pushback. And we say women are complaining, we say they are getting unfair advantages because we have a right to this position. Same with a person of European American background. If there are push and efforts to diversify, I'm in the field that's very few African Americans in my field of being a professor, then especially being a tenured professor in a leadership position and those kinds of things, a research professor, and all these things. It's a very much male-dominated field, and not only that, it's dominated by those that are not BIPOC, not of Black and brown communities, but it's dominated by Europeans, those of European background. And so when one might see a professor of color, the assumption is they got there by some type of quota or they had an unfair advantage. Internalization of superior messages. And so nobody is out there saying it's explicitly that able-bodied people are better than disabled, or nobody's explicitly saying men are better than women, but it's the messages that are put forth internally. And there's a lack of humility. Ciso and D'Angelo are critical of this lack of humility, the lack of willingness to even acknowledge privilege. Because privilege is invisible. I don't see it. I don't oppress anybody. My best friend is Black. People say things like that. I had 3 sisters, and we always took care of them, and we don't see our privilege all of the time. And that's what Ciso and D'Angelo, that's their argument. Right, there's a few words I want to highlight. Meritocracy is this belief that, like Blue's Clues, you can do anything that you want to do. If you've seen the cartoon. If you haven't seen the cartoon, I have small children. If you haven't seen the cartoon, go watch Blue's Clues, and that's one of the things they say all the time. And meritocracy says that. But the reality is there are barriers. If you have an individual from housing projects and neither one of her parents has a college degree or a high school diploma, or maybe the individual grew up in a single dad household. I've seen that too. But of course, single mom is more the case. They're going to have less of an advantage than a child who has 2 parents that are teachers, or 2 parents that work in the corporate world that make a 6-figure salary, or a parent that's a senator or a scientist, or a parent that's a successful business owner. And 2-parent household, they don't have to work as hard. And so we need to acknowledge meritocracy does not take into the account people come into life with different resources. Some come into the life with a will, and others come into life with a bill. It's a good way of looking at it. But it's the belief that people's achievements are based solely on their own efforts, abilities, or merits. Those that don't succeed are simply not as capable, or do not try as hard as those that do. This is simply not true. It's not based solely on individual talents and efforts. Think about that from a practical standpoint. If an individual comes into the world having inherited $500,000, like from day one, or as soon as you turn 18 and get ready to go to college, we'll release $500,000 to you. And that's just for starts. We also have an apartment for you that you can stay in. You don't have to stay on campus. You can stay in an apartment near campus. We'll buy you a luxury apartment. You'll have a brand new car. So that individual is going to have much more of an advantage than an African American that's very bright, African American woman or Hispanic woman that's very bright, high achieving, 4.0, and they're going to college, but they start at a disadvantage compared to the other individual. Doesn't matter how hard they work, the individual with the money is still at an advantage. Okay, we have to just acknowledge that. That's all I'm saying. Doesn't mean the individual with money is a bad person. It doesn't mean the individual that inherited money is a horrible person and evil. We're just acknowledging that some people have more resources than others. And it's intellectually dishonest to ignore that. And then scholars are critical of equal opportunities. They don't have equal opportunities. Um, they don't have in this world we don't have equal opportunities all the time. This world is unjust and unequal. Individualism, and so equal opportunity in today's world, people are no longer prejudiced. This is a critique. This is not true. Social injustice is a thing of the past. And everyone has the same opportunities. That's just not true. Also, critical of individualism, where we are each unique and outside forces of socialization. Group memberships are irrelevant. You can work really, really hard to get what you want. And so, Senso and D'Angelo are critical of that. Human nature rationalizes privilege as natural. Someone has to be on top. Uses concepts based in biology or religion. Just Senso and D'Angelo highlights these terms as being critical of them. Internalization of messages of superiority. Everything in our environment is constructed to enable the dominant group to take their privilege for granted. Those in the dominant position see themselves as superior and tell stories that affirm and support that superiority. There's a lack of interest in perspectives of minoritized groups except in limited control situations. And then stories. People tell stories. I knew somebody that came from the housing projects and they're a millionaire now, so therefore everybody can make it. But that's an exception, okay? There's a lack of humility, and so from the dominant group, whether it's male privilege or privilege as it relates to race or ability, we have to embrace humility and understand that we come from a dominant position. We have privileges, and we talked about this already. Visibility of privileges. There's some misconceptions that the book highlights. If one feels they haven't personally discriminated, then they aren't benefiting from privilege. That's just not true. Sometimes we can benefit and not know it. If one can't feel their social institutional power, then they don't have it. Not true. Same thing. If a minoritized person is in charge, there's no oppression. And that's not true either. Because society has oppressive situations and systems. If one is oppressed in one social group membership, they cannot be privileged in another. That's not true either. They don't sort of cancel each other out. That's all I want to say from this chapter. And so I'll stop recording here. So hopefully you got a lot out of that. Take a look at that as you take your quizzes and everything, and we'll go from there. Thank you.